You walked into a Lowe's or a Home Depot last fall, maybe a Tractor Supply, and you stood in front of a log splitter that had a price tag that felt reasonable, and a label that said something like Champion or Craftsman or PowerSmart, and you thought, how bad can it be? You thought it splits wood, it has a warranty, it comes on a trailer, what is the worst that could happen? So you loaded it up, you took it home, you ran maybe 4 cords through it before the hydraulic pump started whining like a sick dog, or the beam cracked, or the ram started leaking fluid down into the dirt every 3rd split. And now that machine is sitting in the corner of your shed collecting dust while you are back to renting something from the equipment yard, or borrowing your neighbor's machine that is 20 years old and still running like it was built yesterday. That old machine your neighbor has, the one that looks ugly and smells like old hydraulic fluid and has duct tape on the handle, that machine is still running because somebody built it to run. And the reason you cannot buy something like that at Lowe's today is not because those machines do not exist anymore. It is because the brands that build them the right way do not pay the shelf fees, do not offer the dealer margin, and do not put their money into packaging and advertising. They put it into the steel and the pump and the cylinder. And that is exactly why you have never heard of them, and exactly why this video exists. If this is the kind of thing nobody tells you at the equipment dealer, subscribe to Split and Saw, because every single video on this channel exists to give you the real answer before you spend $1 you cannot get back. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss it. There is a company operating out of Leicester, New York, a small town in Livingston County, that has been building log splitters the way a machine shop builds things, not the way a consumer products company designs things. That company is Timberwolf, and most people in the outdoor power equipment world outside of the Northeast have never walked into a dealer that carries them, not because Timberwolf is regional or niche in any limiting sense, but because they have chosen deliberately to sell through a tight dealer network rather than chase the volume game at the big retailers. The TW2 is the machine that sits at the base of their lineup, and if you approach it thinking it is a starter machine or an entry-level product, you are going to misread what you are looking at. This is not a starter machine. This is a working machine that happens to carry a price that a serious property owner can reach without financing their firewood operation. The TW2 runs a 6.5 horsepower Briggs & Stratton engine that is not the kind of Briggs you find bolted onto a department store. Pressure washer. Timberwolf specs their engines with commercial service intervals in mind, meaning the oiling systems, the air filtration, and the valve tolerances are built for sustained duty cycles, not for the 2 weekends a year that a typical homeowner use case assumes. The hydraulic system behind that engine is where Timberwolf starts to separate from everything you find in a box store aisle. The pump on the TW2 is a 2-stage hydraulic unit, which means it operates on a fast approach cycle and a high-pressure power cycle. In plain language, the ram moves quickly toward the log to save you time, and when it hits resistance, the pump shifts into its power mode and delivers the force needed to drive through the wood. Box store machines often run single-stage pumps, which means the ram moves at one speed regardless of load. That sounds fine until you spend a full day splitting and realize how much time you are losing waiting for the ram to travel, and how much harder the pump is working every single split. A 2-stage pump is not a marketing feature. It is a fundamental engineering decision that determines how long the machine survives a real workload. The beam on the TW2 is fabricated from heavy-gauge steel channel, and Timberwolf builds their own beams in-house in Leicester, rather than sourcing from an overseas fabricator. That matters in ways that are not always visible. When a beam is designed by the same engineers who design the cylinder mount, the wedge, and the hydraulic system, everything lines up. The stress points are calculated together. The welds are placed where the engineers know the load is going. When you buy a machine assembled from globally sourced components that were each designed by different teams, you get a machine that works adequately under normal conditions and starts to show its seams when you push it past what the marketing team imagined. Timberwolf never built a machine with a marketing team in the room. They built it with a machinist in the room, and that is a completely different product. The TW2 operates in both vertical and horizontal modes, which is a feature that sounds simple until you actually own a machine that does not offer it. Splitting in horizontal mode is comfortable for smaller rounds and lets you work at a natural height. Flipping to vertical mode is what saves your back on the big rounds, the ones that weigh 60 or 80 pounds, and that you absolutely do not want to lift onto a horizontal table. The transition between modes on the TW2 is a mechanical conversion that takes maybe 2 minutes once you have done it a few times, and the machine locks solidly in both positions without any flex in the frame. That rigidity is a direct result of building from their own steel, rather than designing around the lightest possible components to hit a retail price point. The people who actually run TW2 units in the field skew heavily towards small firewood dealers who are processing somewhere between 15 and 40 cords a season. Serious homeowners on properties of 10 acres or more who heat primarily with wood, and rural contractors who split as part of a broader land clearing or logging operation. These are not hobbyists. These are people for whom a machine failure in October is not an inconvenience. It is a problem that costs money and heat. Timberwolf holds a reputation in the firewood dealer community specifically because their machines show up on the used market with high hours and still command serious resale prices. A 10-year-old TW2 with 300 hours on it is worth real money because the market knows what it is. A 5-year-old box store machine with 100 hours is worth almost nothing because the market knows what that is too. Before we keep going, I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually answer this in the comments below. Have you ever spent real money on a log splitter or a chainsaw, taken it home, put it to work, and watched it fall apart in the first season? Because if that happened to you, you are not alone. And you are not stupid for trusting the brand on the label. Drop a comment right now and just say, "I got burned." That is it. 3 words. Because every person who reads that comment is going to feel less alone, and you are going to help somebody else avoid making the same mistake. I read every single comment on this channel. The reason you cannot buy a Timberwolf at your local Tractor Supply is the same reason it holds its value used. Timberwolf does not want to be on that shelf. Being on that shelf means designing to a price, compromising on the cylinder, thinning the beam, sourcing the engine from the cheapest available supplier, and ultimately delivering a machine that generates returns and warranty claims and customer frustration. Timberwolf would rather sell fewer machines through dealers who understand the product and can support it than sell 100,000 units through retail and spend the next decade managing the fallout. That is a business decision, but it is also a values decision, and you feel it in the machine the first time you cycle the Ram. Now move about 200 miles southeast of Leicester, down into central Pennsylvania, into a small community called Millmont in Union County, and you find a company called Wolf Ridge Manufacturing. Wolf Ridge is the kind of operation that makes outdoor power equipment people nervous to talk about in public. Not because anything is wrong, but because the people who have found them genuinely do not want everybody else to find them and drive the price up or create a backorder situation. That sounds like an exaggeration until you spend time in firewood dealer forums or logging community groups, and notice how often the people with the most hours on their equipment are the quietest about where they bought it. Wolf Ridge is one of those brands. The 22RS is their 22-ton combination unit, and the number that matters more than the tonnage figure is the cylinder bore. Wolf Ridge runs a 4-inch bore cylinder on the 22RS, which is genuinely large for a machine in this class. Bore diameter is the measurement across the inside of the hydraulic cylinder where the ram travels, and it directly determines how much force the hydraulic system can generate. A larger bore at a given hydraulic pressure produces more force, simple as that. Most machines claiming comparable tonnage ratings in the sub-$3,000 range are running a 3.5-inch bore or smaller and arriving at their advertised tonnage figure by running the hydraulic system at higher pressure to compensate. Higher pressure on a smaller cylinder means more stress on the pump, more heat in the fluid, and faster wear across the entire hydraulic circuit. Wolf Ridge chose the larger bore, which means the 22RS gets to its rated force at lower system pressure, which means the pump runs cooler, lasts longer, and asks less of every seal and fitting in the system. The engine on the 22RS is a Briggs & Stratton 950 series in the 208 cubic centimeter displacement range. And Wolf Ridge pairs it with a Byers Products 2-stage pump that the serious hydraulics community has respected for decades. Byers Products has been manufacturing hydraulic components in Mentor, Ohio since 1946, and their pumps show up on snowplows, dump trailers, and utility equipment across North America because they are built for real working conditions, not for demonstration units at a trade show. When Wolf Ridge chose Byers as their pump supplier, rather than sourcing from an offshore catalog, they made a decision that the buyer of a 22RS does not see on the spec sheet, but absolutely feels over 5 seasons of use. The pump stays efficient. The cycle times stay consistent. The machine behaves on year 4 the way it behaved on day 1. The 22RS beam is a 5-inch by 10-inch I-beam, which is a structural dimension that puts it in a class above most consumer-oriented machines. An I-beam of that cross-section has a moment of inertia, which is the engineering measurement of resistance to bending, that is substantially higher than what you get from a thinner or narrower section. When you are driving a heavy wedge through a knotted, twisted, wet oak, ground that is fighting back against every inch of travel, That beam is carrying the full reaction force from the cylinder at one end and the wedge at the other. A beam that flexes under that load is a beam that is accumulating fatigue with every cycle. A beam with the structural section of the 22RS is not flexing. It is doing exactly what a beam is supposed to do, which is transfer force without storing it. That is the difference between a machine you replace in 4 years and a machine you pass on. Wolf Ridge builds the 22RS in Millmont with a team that is small enough that quality control is not a department, it is a culture. The people welding the frames are the same people who have heard about what happened when a frame was not welded correctly, and that creates a level of attention that no ISO certification or quality management system can manufacture from the outside. Small American manufacturers in this segment, the ones who have survived and maintained reputation, have done it the hard way. They have done it by building machines that come back for their second unit or their third, not by capturing first-time buyers with packaging and a low price. The horizontal and vertical functionality on the 22RS follows a similar design philosophy to the TW2 in that the conversion is mechanically positive and the machine is rigid in both positions. What Wolf Ridge adds is a log cradle and table design that accommodates large diameter rounds more comfortably, which matters when your wood supply is coming off a property with old growth timber, big oak, big ash, big maple that has been standing for 60 or 80 years and produces rounds that a standard table size does not handle well. The 22RS was clearly designed by people who split a lot of wood before they started designing the machine, which sounds like an obvious standard but is not actually how most consumer-grade log splitters come into the world. The buyer who is right for a Wolf Ridge 22RS is somebody who has done this before. Maybe you owned a box store machine and got burned, or maybe you did your homework early and arrived at Wolf Ridge through forum research or a recommendation from somebody whose equipment opinion you trust. Either way, the 22RS is not a machine for somebody who splits 1 cord a year for the fireplace. It is a machine for somebody who heats their home entirely with wood, who sells firewood as a side income or a primary income, or who manages enough acreage that splitting is a genuine seasonal workload that demands a machine with no soft spots. The price on a 22RS sits in a range that is meaningfully higher than what you find at a home improvement store, and it is meaningfully lower than what you would pay for a fully commercial production splitter. It occupies exactly the space where a serious non-commercial operator lives, and it fills that space without apology. What both Timberwolf and Wolf Ridge understand, and what the big box stores have no interest in understanding, is that the person who splits serious wood does not need the machine to look good in an advertisement. They need it to start in the cold, cycle without hesitation, hold its hydraulic pressure through a long day, and still be running in the same configuration 10 years from now. Neither of these companies has a national advertising budget. Neither of them sponsors influencer content or runs television spots. Both of them have waiting lists at certain times of year because the people who find them tend to tell 2 or 3 other people who take it seriously. And word moves through the firewood and logging community slower than a social media algorithm, but with a permanence that no advertisement achieves. When somebody in a firewood dealer group says they have run their Timberwolf or their Wolf Ridge for 8 years without a serious failure, that statement carries weight that no marketing department can manufacture. If you have been splitting wood long enough to know what a bad season with a cheap machine feels like, if you have replaced seals on a Chinese-sourced cylinder, or tried to find parts for a pump that was discontinued 18 months after the machine was manufactured, then you already understand what these two brands are offering. They are offering the thing that should be standard, and somehow is not, which is a machine that treats your time and your money, and your wood pile, with the same seriousness that you bring to the work itself. The Timberwolf TW2 is a combination vertical and horizontal splitter built in Leicester, New York, with a 2-stage hydraulic pump, a commercial spec Briggs engine, and a beam that was fabricated by the same people who designed the machine. It is the right choice for a property owner or small firewood dealer who needs a machine that will process 15 to 40 cords a season without requiring a rebuild conversation. The Wolf Ridge 22RS is a 22-ton combination splitter built in Millmont, Pennsylvania, running a 4-inch bore cylinder, a buyer's products pump with decades of working equipment credibility, and a 5-inch by 10-inch I-beam that will carry full splitting loads for a working lifetime. It is the right choice for someone who heats with wood seriously, sells firewood, or manages significant timber acreage, and needs a machine with no engineered-in compromises. Neither of these machines is going to show up at your local Home Depot. Neither of them is going to be on sale the week before Thanksgiving with a mail-in rebate. But both of them are going to be running in the same condition 5 seasons from now, while the box store machine in your neighbor's shed is already a parts donor. If you want to see how these two compare against some of the best commercial splitters that professionals run on production yards, that video is already on this channel, and it is worth your time before you write the check.